Evening, everyone. And first, we'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on Nokwelakam, which is unceded territory of the Skohomish Nation. We are here for a public information session on the pesticide use control bylaw, which has received one reading from council so far. The schedule for this evening is going to be, we have Phil Gregory presenting for a few minutes first, and then after that, we're going to have Bruce and Bonnie will talk more about the pesticide bylaw after that, and we'll have a good long period for questions afterwards, and any comments that you have as well. So first up is Phil Gregory, and he's the Professor Emeritus of Physics and Astronomy at UBC. 7 years ago, he refocused his research to what is necessary to sustain human life on Earth in the face of climate change, the looming collapse of agriculture, and an explosion of chronic diseases. In his new book, Pathway to Regeneration, he shows how they are all interconnected, and a key part of the solution is regenerative agriculture, which is all about mimicking nature. The current paradigm of industrial agriculture is all about waging a war on nature, which ends up being a war on humans, and pesticides play a key role in this warfare. As a Bowen resident, he and his wife Jackie are founding members of the Bowen Island Food Resilience Society, otherwise known as BIFS. So without further ado, Phil, please go ahead.
Okay, let me just share my screen. So has that come up for everybody?
Yep.
All right. So, well, thanks very much for allowing me to talk tonight. And I'm really going to, both Bruce and I are going to talk on behalf of the work of a subcommittee of BIFS, which also includes Bill Lighthead, Shasta Martinek, and Rabbi Wilcox. And what I want to sort of briefly outline is the rationale behind why BIFS got into pesticides and ended up approaching the Muni to see if they would be willing to introduce a cosmetic pesticide ban. And so let me just go through some of our rationale, and hopefully it'll persuade any doubters of the legitimacy of this whole approach. So by way of an outline, I'm going to start with the use of pesticides in the agricultural war on nature, and then jump to regenerative agriculture to the rescue, and try to make a case for a cosmetic pesticide ban on Bowen, and show some examples of natural and permitted pesticides. And I probably won't get to time to go over the BIFS cosmetic pesticide survey, but it is available, and the Muni has a copy of that. Anybody wants to see the results of the survey we conducted, that's available. And then I'll turn it over to Bruce. So for too long, we've relied on the technology of industrial agriculture to carry out a warfare against weeds, insects, microbes, and in general nature, only to discover that we have less than 60 years of farming remaining due to soil degradation. We're experiencing an explosive growth of chronic diseases, epidemic in scale, and strongly correlated to agricultural chemical use. And finally, industrial agriculture is unsustainable. So these chemical pesticides are a huge weapon in war on nature. Include herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and rodenticides. And the question is there another way? And the answer to that is regenerative agriculture. In regenerative agriculture, we mimic nature and cooperate with her amazing underground workforce to restore degraded soil, sequester atmospheric carbon, and grow more nutritious food. It's a lot less expensive because we don't require plowing and expensive synthetic chemical fertilizers and pesticides. In fact, plowing, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are our main problem because they greatly depress the functioning of the soil food web. And that's what we rely on in regenerative agriculture, is a good functioning soil food web, including the billions of microbes that exist in every teaspoon of soil. So why would we want to ban cosmetic pesticides? What are some other reasons for wanting to ban them? And so here I just want to briefly outline some health effects of the 30 most commonly used lawn pesticides. This all comes from an organization called Beyond Pesticides, which is a nonprofit that is founded in 1981 and has been focused on this, compiling the science behind or making the case based on science. So as you can see, many of these things are pretty nasty. If you look down the list here, and when we're only talking about 30, and a lot of them really are nasty in many different ways. And the effect on the environment is also quite disastrous. 19 detected in groundwater, 20 have the ability to leach into drinking water sources, 22 are toxic to birds, 30 are toxic to fish and other aquatic organisms vital to our ecosystem, and 29 are toxic to bees. So if one wants to look at that in a little more detail, this is a rather useful chart, which on the vertical axis here, you can see a list of herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. And on the horizontal axis, you can see health effects. So cancer, endocrine disruption, reproductive effects, neurotoxicity, kidney liver damage, sensitizer and irritant, and birth defects. And wherever you see an X in the column, that's a documented health effect associated with that particular pesticide. So if you take the very first one here, 2,4-D, you can see it has health effects, documented health effects on all of these. And I don't think there's any of the others on here have a minimum of 2 documented health effects. So this is all US data, but I've checked, and 25 of these pesticides are also registered for use in Canada. So one of the significant things about the proposed cosmetic bylaw is that all of these would be banned by Bowen's cosmetic pesticide ban. And Bonnie will speak to the exemptions behind that, and also under what situations that cosmetic bylaw is valid and legally binding. So a lot more to come on that from Bonnie. So I just wanted to briefly put up this slide, which is about glyphosate, which is the most heavily used pesticide in the world by far. It's in the soil, the water, the air. There's actually no escaping it. Even organic agriculture, the rain coming down on that brings a certain degree of glyphosate. We just can't avoid it. Now, it was advertised very strongly that it was harmless to the environment, harmless to the environment. But we find, in fact, that it's very persistent in the environment, despite this advertising. And I've listed in these boxes a fraction of the court cases that have been successfully pursued against Monsanto over its false advertising and over its health effects. And the thing on the left here, the bottom left, is December of 2020, New York State passed a bylaw prohibiting glyphosate use on any state property. So that's the entire state. You're not allowed to use glyphosate anymore. The evidence is very strong that this is a serious health risk. Now, why can't I advance my slide here? Hang on. Here we go. So how do you know if a particular product has glyphosate in it? So they don't always say in the product name that it contains glyphosate. So you really have to check the ingredients. So in Canada, these are the names of all the products that are sold at some place in Canada, and they all contain glyphosate. My favorite is the one called Wise Up. I wish they would wise up. To give you a little bit of perspective, back in 2016, when I looked this up, there were 7,355 pesticide products registered for use in Health Canada. And each year, a great number of new ones appear. And only very slowly do some of the worst cases get knocked off the list. Some of them we're finding on the basis of evidence being accumulated for the past 40 years that there's no safe limit, particularly organophosphates. There's really no safe limit. Even at the lowest doses, they can cause harm to children's brains. But it was only in 2021 this was introduced. One of them was introduced in 1965, and it took until 2021 to take it off the list of approved pesticides. So here's an example of a natural and permitted pesticides, which provide solutions to some common pest problems that you would find in a typical garden. I really appreciate you can't read all of these things without blowing it up, but there are solutions, alternate solutions. So we carried out a survey before approaching the municipality, I believe, just to see what public reaction would be. And it wasn't an unbiased survey. Most of the people that responded were people that were growing food, but nevertheless, there was strong support for such a ban. And I won't say anything more about that, but that survey is available and anybody can have a look at it. And so now I'd like to turn over the floor to Bruce Lanphier. So I will stop sharing at this point.
Thank you, Phil. I first just wanted to say it's been great working with this committee and Phil in particular, because he really gets down into the weeds. And I'm much more of a focus on the health impacts of these pesticides, along with other toxic chemicals. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the kind of research that's been looked at, focusing especially on kids. And what we know about kids is that the developing brain is uniquely vulnerable to toxic chemicals. Children, of course, don't develop other problems like coronary heart disease, but time and again, what we found is when we look at trying to protect the public from either air pollution or lead or pesticides, looking at how these chemicals impact children's brain gives us a good insight into whether this is going to be toxic or not. So just beginning with, even a big picture is that over 6,000 Canadians are acutely poisoned by pesticides every year, and about half of those are children. So this is just a heavy dose all at once, about 6,000 every year. So by reducing the amount of pesticides in our homes, we can begin to reduce those acute pesticide poisonings. But in some ways, those really are just, those high doses are really just the tip of the iceberg. We're now concerned about doses of pesticides that we can measure in pregnant women, children, and the rest of us in the parts per billion. We find adverse health effects in the parts per billion of these pesticides. And in most cases, we can find these, for example, organophosphates, we found in over 90% of pregnant women in a Canadian birth cohort. That's typical. These are not farm working women. These are women in 10 cities across Canada. Much of that comes from diet and pesticides used in and around their homes. So parts per billion, like 1 part per billion would be equivalent of 1 or 2 tablespoons of sugar in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So exceedingly small amounts. But as Phil said, we don't see any evidence for a threshold for organophosphate pesticides, for example. In other cases with glyphosate, nobody's looked. The safety studies that were done back in the 70s were very incomplete rodent studies. And so by default, what have we done? We've allowed millions, probably now billions of people to be exposed. And then we go back and find out whether we see adverse health effects. We don't know if it's safe. That's the job of people like me to go along and find out, but it's only after, again, widespread exposure for decades and millions or billions of people have been exposed. So with children, what we found is that pesticide exposures with no evidence of a safe level, particularly the insecticides, the organophosphate pesticides, have been associated with an increase in ADHD, diminished learning abilities, and some studies have found that pesticides are a risk factor for autism, especially if the exposures are happening during early brain development, and if the pregnant woman, the mother, is not yet taking folate supplement or is deficient in folate. There's also strong evidence from what we call meta-analyses. These are studies of studies, both from California, where they've done extraordinarily detailed studies of childhood leukemia, and around the world, pesticide exposure in utero is associated with an increased risk for childhood leukemia. That's been known now for a number of years, but most of the money dedicated to childhood cancer goes to treating children with childhood leukemia. About 1% of the dollars, this is based on US data, we don't have it for Canada, is dedicated to find ways to prevent childhood leukemia and other types of cancer. So what we know that pesticides aren't usually adequately tested. So that means that the federal agencies that regulate pesticides, they regulate pesticides as though humans can safely manage small amounts of these pesticides. And all the evidence that's been done over the past 20 to 30 years shows that that's not true. So how did we get to that point? Well, about 50 years ago, there was an assumption made that small amounts of chemicals like pesticides, like lead, like mercury or PCBs are safe. We don't have to worry about them. But all the evidence since then has shown exactly the opposite. And yet we still continue to regulate them as though there are safe levels. So I wanted to point out this concept that my colleagues and I use. It's kind of a troubling one, and this term doesn't really capture how troubling it is. It's called regrettable substitution. And I don't know how many of you have heard that term before, but I'll paint a picture. So early on, we used lead arsenate in orchards and farms until it was shown to be toxic. Then it was replaced with DDT. Now, all of us are exposed to lead. Many of us are exposed to arsenic. And we knew it was poison, but it was used, and then it was replaced with DDT. Of course, later on, that was shown to be toxic. I think I mentioned that in our Canadian birth cohort study among the pregnant women, 90% of women had measurable amounts of DDT or its metabolite, DDE. That's 40 or 50 years after DDT was banned, and yet we're still measuring it. So DDT was banned. Then we shifted to organophosphate pesticides. And there was some conceptual benefit of that because DDT is a persistent pollutant. It stays around for generations. Organophosphate pesticides have a short half-life, and typically they will be gone within 6 hours to a day after an exposure. But because we're constantly exposed, it's really like having chronic exposure to organophosphate pesticides. The good news is if we do restrict or ban them, then those exposures should be reduced. They won't go away entirely because there's still going to be other sources we can't deal with immediately. Let's see. So now we shifted to pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, and glyphosate. Those have replaced these older insecticides and herbicides, but there's already evidence, as Phil pointed out, that these too are toxic. In a new study that we did in this Canadian birth cohort, we found that over 70% of pregnant women are exposed to glyphosate. We found it in their urine, and we recruited them in 2008, 2010. We've continued to follow them. I would imagine that the exposures we would find in pregnant women today are much higher because, as Rachel Carson said 60 years ago, if you use pesticides, resistance will develop, and resistance has developed to glyphosate. And so what industry has had to do is ramp up the concentration they use of glyphosate, and they can use it in combination with other pesticides like 2,4-D or dicamba. We have not enough evidence about how toxic glyphosate is, but now we're starting to mix these things because of growing resistance. So what can we conclude from all this research over the past century? Well, first, we can no longer dismiss chemicals as being toxic for pests, but not for humans. If these things are toxic to pests, we have to assume that they're going to be toxic for humans as well. Now, the nice thing is, and we'll talk more about this, we don't need these pesticides. In most cases, we can do without them. Now, there could be some public health emergencies, some extraordinarily difficult invasive weeds, but by and large, we don't need them. And so we now know it's healthier to avoid them. There's some health benefits. We can avoid certain adverse consequences like childhood leukemia, like brain-based disorders in kids, and that's just focusing on kids. The other thing I think we should keep in mind is that this isn't really a hard sell. Quebec in 2006, the entire province adopted a cosmetic ban on pesticides, and that was followed by Ontario, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and many of the municipalities in BC. So the road has been paved, and it should be pretty smooth sailing for Bowen Island to follow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bruce. That was really enlightening. I will pass it over to Bonnie. She will tell us more about the bylaw. Thanks.
There we go. Is everybody seeing my presentation okay? Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody. And thank you so much, Phil and Bruce. I feel so lucky we have so many wonderful people on this island, and just the knowledge base is incredible. So yeah, I glean gems from every time I hear both of you talk about this subject. I just wanted to say that, the bylaw wouldn't have been possible, or, would have been a harder road if BIFs hadn't started the ball rolling, so to speak. And also, I just want to thank the Environment and Climate Action Committee and also the subcommittee that worked on this bylaw. And they really help staff along the way with many different issues, but they were instrumental in developing this bylaw. Just see if it's going to advance for me. There we go. So I'll just sort of go through this quite quickly. It's, some of it's not super exciting, but the rationale, and I think some of this has been touched upon already, is that there's been advances to right to a healthy environment as outlined by the federal government as a priority and as formally recognized by the United Nations on October 8th of 2021. Of course, there's been many concerns about pesticides and the risk they pose to health and the well-being of residents and the environment. And that was shown through the BIF survey as well. Pesticides can move, of course, through the environment, the air, the land, the water, and can have an impact on non-target organisms and plants. And there's over 180 local governments throughout Canada have similar regulation to the one being proposed to Bowen Island Municipality. And of course, alternatives do exist. What we're looking at is we did receive the grant for the on-island composting. So we really want to try to reduce, have a clean input and make high quality compost that's pesticide free. So again, I just mentioned the survey that was conducted. And just a little bit about the survey. I know Phil did say that we do have it on our website, and we do. It is there. But just a little bit of a high overview is 143 Bowen Islanders responded to the BIF survey. I'm just going to minimize myself. And there was 11% of the 143 respondents have children under 12 years old and younger in their households, and about 83% of the respondents grow food on Bowen. And here's just a couple of shots of a couple of the different results. And just at number 10, I think that was really good support, and council really saw that result, that would you support a ban on pesticides on Bowen Island if there were safe and effective alternatives? And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. So a bit more background with the municipal process. We're process driven here. So at the January 18th, 2021 Environment and Climate Action Committee, ECAC, Phil and Bruce came and provided a presentation regarding the negative effects of pesticides. And at that same meeting, ECAC recommended that council direct staff to conduct research and explore options for establishing a pesticide ban on Bowen. And subsequently, council consented to ECAC's recommendation, and ECAC struck a subcommittee to work with staff to develop the bylaw. And the subcommittee members, I think everybody's here tonight, and I'm so grateful. And that's Jeff Matheson, Don Schaefer, Will Husby, Michaeli Florendo, and I sat in on those meetings as well. And the subcommittee met 4 times, including once with Phil and Bruce and Rabia. And a draft bylaw was presented to the entire ECAC meeting on October 6th. And that at that meeting, the committee unanimously supported staff bringing the draft bylaw forward to council for first reading. Following a legal review, we had a legal review on October 20th of last year, and then council gave first reading of the bylaw on November 8th and requested that staff host a public information session prior to considering further readings. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with the process of bylaws, but there's 3 readings and then final adoption. So after what I'm thinking is after this session, I will be going back to council. I know I'll be going back to council, but I will be requesting a second reading. Just with regulatory bylaws, council doesn't really generally like to do all 2 readings at once or all 3 readings at once. So we go step by step, and that just gives us more time to really make the bylaw concise and thorough. And yeah, we just give people time to have input along the way. So we'll be going for a second reading, and then following that, hopefully soon after, a third reading and final adoption. So again, a little bit of the context of the development of the bylaw that it's already been talked about. 7 of Canada's provinces have legislation that regulate pesticides, and BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan currently do not have this form of legislation. Regardless, Section 8 of the BC Community Charter lays out the fundamental powers of municipalities. And basically, municipalities can regulate, prohibit, and impose requirements in relation to the application of pesticides for the purpose of maintaining outdoor trees, shrubs, flowers, other ornamental plants, and turf on parcels within the municipality. BIM cannot adopt a bylaw that regulates pesticide use on industrial, commercial, or institutional lands. And the bylaw was developed within the scope of local authority. Along with the collaborative efforts of ECAC and BIFs, the bylaw the draft has been created. And if anybody wants to find that, it is on our website, the first reading version of the bylaw. And so the bylaw regulates pesticides used on outdoor trees, shrubs, flowers, ornamental gardens, ornamental plants, or turf in, under, or upon any public lands or private lands within Bowen Island Municipality. Private lands means a parcel or part of a parcel that is used for residential purposes in the municipality. Private lands do not include parcels of land zoned for industrial, commercial, or institutional purposes. Public lands means land owned, held, or under the care and custody or possession of the municipality. And for the purposes of this bylaw, public lands do not include provincial crown lands or Metro Vancouver Crippen Park. So permits are provided for in the bylaw, and we do have provisions for permits to treat invasive species. There are criteria, and I'm going to be working a little bit more to make the permit section a bit crisper and clarify the criteria a bit better than it has been presented in the first reading. And I open to suggestions and changes to that portion for sure. But basically, what we'll be looking for, we would be potentially issuing permits. There is a cost associated with a permit, $50. But we do want to make sure, and we will have the criteria there, that people have tried other forms and really tried to embrace integrated pest management and demonstrated that other methods have been used. And as a last resort, we may permit pesticides. However, giant hogweed and non-native knotweeds are permit exempt. However, the bylaw does stipulate that the municipality be aware that these species are going to be treated, and we currently really want to get some good data over the first year, especially of the bylaw once it's instated. And also we map knotweed and we map giant hogweed in our corporate GIS system. So we really want to get a good idea where these plants are growing, and also just know what's being used on the island. So the bylaw does ask that people, if they are going to be treating knotweed or hogweed, that they let us know. And I mentioned that there's a fee. There are penalties associated. It is a regulatory bylaw. So there are fines that can be issued for contraventions. Our bylaw policy, our bylaw enforcement policy, we do, generally speaking, like to educate first. That is, it's education followed by enforcement. However, bylaw officers have the discretion when there is egregious contraventions to go straight to fining. So the penalties are fairly steep. They're $500, which in the scope of fines for municipalities, that's fairly steep. But so there is the provision for fines to be issued for contraventions to bylaw 556. Communication, staff's working similar to what Phil had shown. We want to educate about non-toxic, non-pesticide ways of getting rid of pest species. So we are putting together a fact sheet, and also Will Husby is creating an integrated pest management resource that will be available in 2022. So we'll definitely launch and promote these educational documents when the bylaw is adopted. And we do tell council about that. We actually, on the first reading, I did have a draft copy of the pesticide control fact sheet. And also I did provide a draft of the integrated pest management for Bowen Gardner's document that Will has created. So I think that's everything. And I just would love to hear what everybody has to say. And yeah, just questions, comments, suggestions. And yeah, this is how we can make the bylaw better. And I will be collecting, sort of the comments and bringing them back in my report when I go back to council for second reading. I will summarize some of the comments that you raised tonight. And also I'm totally open to making changes that you suggest to the bylaw within the scope of what we can do as local government. We are bound by provincial legislation. So with that, I'll stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. So first, I just wanted to read, McKaylee had a comment in the chat, and that was just to please include the Latin names for giant hogweed and knotweeds in the bylaw, as common names can be inconsistent.
Yes, thank you, McKaylee. They are in there. I just didn't put them on my slide tonight, but they are definitely in the bylaw. Yeah, thank you.
And, oh, sorry, Bonnie. And then Susan Swift had her hand up for a bit here. So please go ahead.
Yeah, there's probably a reason for this, and I'd like to hear what it is. I doubt you guys would have any oversights. I mean, you have oversight, but not missing something. In the list of where you cannot use pesticides, it has trees, shrubs, flowers, ornamental plants, nothing about food crops. And that concerns me, because food is what we would mostly come in contact with. And it also means if you're not regulating spraying on food crops, then pollinators are also getting hurt. Sometimes we care more about pollinators than we care about humans, it seems. But in any case, I'm just wondering what the rationale for that is. I hope it's not simply because other people don't put that on their list. I hope we have a reason.
Yeah, really good question, Susan. That's a question that I had and others had when we were developing the bylaw, and I got legal opinion on that. And unfortunately, it's outside the scope that local governments can regulate. So right to farm or other reasons, other legal reasons. So we cannot restrict the use on food producing plants. And that was legal opinion. So that's my answer. It's not a great one, but that's what I was told by legal counsel.
Shoot. It didn't click there for me. Sorry about that. Thanks, Bonnie. We'll go to Jackie Bradley next, and then Sue Ellen Fast had her hand up after that. Okay.
Okay, I have two things. One, I'm just curious, golf course wasn't listed there. Is that because it's not, you can't do that, or is that a possible place where the bylaw can apply?
Yeah, thank you. Really good question, Jackie. And that was a question we all had as well. It's not a residential property, the parcel on Bowen Island. So it's exempt from the bylaw because we can't regulate. Yeah, if down the road on that parcel, if there was to be built a residence of some sort, or it started to be used as residential use, then it would be bylaw applicable.
Okay, and what about enforcement? How do we know if somebody is using chemicals on their own personal garden? Is it the kind of thing where somebody has to report it?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know, right? And so most of our bylaws are from people reporting. You know, it's not always the best scenario, neighbor reporting a neighbor or you know, but that's the only way we would know. Yeah, or if, you know, if a bylaw officer's out and sees somebody, I mean, we can enforce when we see something, just if we're out and about, but we do rely on the community. Mhm. And hopefully the education too, you know, we can continue to educate and all of us can educate. And so, you know, we hope we move towards less pesticide use
Yeah.
on Bowen.
Yeah, I think education is really the key.
Yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Jackie, and thanks for your answers, Bonnie. Go ahead, Sue Ellen.
Thanks, everybody. And I'm just so delighted to see this work coming together and everybody pitching in for this really important work. This has been in this kind of thing, like a healthy environment has been in the official community plan forever. And last term, that municipal council group made a bunch of statements about a right to a healthy environment, and we wrote to the federal government and things like that. So it's I see this as a really important stage of the work coming along now. Thank you, Bonnie and Carla as well. And I just wanted to respond to the powers of a municipality. Powers of local government are not what you think they might be. There's a lot of things we're responsible for, and there's a lot of things that we're not allowed to do. So provincial laws, a municipality is like a subcommittee or whatever of the provincial laws, and they bind us. However, I heard you say education, and that's really the kind of thing, the awareness and the appreciation of the issues and the understanding, and then the action that people can take if they're growing food or trying to sell food on Bowen. I think that's the kind of, or obviously in the co-ops and the community supported agriculture programs and things like that. I think that the time is ripe, and how ripe to talk about tomatoes in a pesticide session. I just want to say I'd be happy to answer any questions or give whatever support I can do, but I'm just one of 7 councillors, and I think this is terrific. I'm also an Islands Trust vice chair, which means I chair the Denman Island Local Trust Committee about land use, and they are have declared themselves a pesticide-free island, I believe, through their official community plan. But anyway, they have a little sign as you come off the ferry with butterflies and pollinators on it, and it says pesticide-free island or something like that. So I'll dig up a photo and send it to Bonnie and Carla and to Will, and then we can see. But more power to you. Thank you all for doing this.
Thanks so much, Ellen. Michaela has her hand up, but I think Elaine has went like this a couple times. Did you? I think she was before you, if that's okay, Michaela. You can go ahead, Elaine.
Yeah, I was surprised when you said that gardens can't be included in this pesticide ban, because I had assumed that the right to farm applied to farms, not to gardens. So in terms of sort of a next level of this and who else to approach and possibly pressure, is that a provincial legislation?
Yeah, and Elaine, thank you for that. And I might be wrong about the right to farm, but there's definitely, it's outside our sphere of influence or our concurrent jurisdictional boundaries. So whether it's, you know, the right to farm has some influence on that, but definitely it's very specific on what we can regulate, and it's ornamental gardens or vegetable gardens are not in there. So it's just outside. And if I might have not, it might not be because of the right to farm. So I could have been inaccurate with that. But saying that, so rodenticides, for example, have received a provincial ban for, I believe they're doing a year anyway. So always advocacy at the local level can change provincial legislation. And so, we didn't really like it. It helps, like Bruce was saying, a lot of our provinces have provincial Quebec, provincial wide bans. And that would really help in BC if that was the case and the province took a stand. So, which they have done temporarily with the rodenticide. So yes, I think advocacy at the provincial level could.
Can you also tell me where it's lodged that prohibits it, including the ban, including the golf course?
Yeah, so again, it's within our sphere of influence or our concurrent jurisdictional boundaries, and you can only regulate pesticide use on residential. You can't do it on industrial. Yeah.
Considered industrial or commercial, or that was really what my question was. What is the golf course what category is it under?
It's not residential. So I guess that it's a kind of a gray area, but it's not residential. So it's actually a zone that doesn't allow, or that parcel doesn't allow dwellings. So it's not residential. So, I mean, perhaps we could look into it, but the superficial legal opinion that I got on it was that it's not residential. It could be argued that it's commercial. Even though it's not zoned commercial, it's a commercial enterprise. So our legal counsel felt that the bylaw or our sphere of influence or concurrent influence didn't apply to that plot of land. That's the best answer I could get. I'm not a lawyer, so yeah.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, McKaylee.
I had two things that I wanted to mention. I think we should probably add aquatic invasives as well to our list of things. There's several aquatic species, plants, fish, and parasites that can be, there's been a new fish disease that was just discovered in Alberta, and they're starting to do some biological control for it. So I think we should look at including that. And then I also wanted to say one of the information sheets that we should put together should include some information on how to do proper disposal for people that have this stuff stored in their garages and whatever else, what's the best way to dispose of it on Bowen, not down the drain.
McKaylee, can you just, sorry, so you can you elaborate again or repeat what you're looking at in the bylaw with respect to aquatic invasives? Sorry, I didn't catch.
That's okay. And it's been a couple of months since I've looked at the pesticide bylaw, but there's this section of it where we identify the different species or the different breadth of species that are targeted, and maybe it's in the exemption section. So we talk about what is targeted and then what isn't. And so aquatic land is one of or aquatic areas is one of those things. Drainages are covered by this, but I'm specifically thinking of ponds and lakes and things like that where milfoil or goldfish can come into that can then be treated with pesticides in order to eliminate those species. So I just wanted to include that in the list. I can't remember where it was.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, McKaylee, for your comments. Phil, you can go ahead.
I just wanted to comment about golf courses that you know, a golf course grows a crop, which is grass. And regenerative agriculture applies equally to growing, you know, in any crops. And so in principle, golf courses could save themselves a lot of money if they were to, you know, come up to speed on regenerative growing of grass. There's a lot to be said about it. And in fact, it is happening in some golf courses in North America. So there's a big educational opportunity, I would say, in that regard.
Definitely. And Carl and I would like to go and have a, just talk with the golf course folks and see how maybe, yeah, just see what's going on and see if we can help in any way, and just make sure that they're aware of the bylaw. Yeah, because it is a source of input for sure. And Phil, there was that great article I think you found of a golf course. I think it was in the States somewhere, and they were completely pesticide free and doing quite well.
Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's good.
Phil, can we ask them to give you a call if they need any from an expert?
Yeah, if they're curious, I'd be happy to talk to them. Yeah.
Well, we could start the conversation, definitely.
Right.
Nancy, did you want to go ahead next?
Yes, thank you. I think this is along the lines of, I realize that there's a lot that we can't legislate or control with this bylaw, but I think we do have influence, and I would be wondering whether as part of this rolling out, part of that influence could also think about what is easily available on the island, right? If you go to the store and you can easily pick up multiple products, the influence that might, I guess I would wonder if the municipality can help influence what the products, I mean, we can't tell the stores they can't, but if we understand and we try to sort of think that Bowen could be out front with this, is, educating the consumers, educating the shopkeepers, and some will voluntarily decide to reduce the pesticides, right? If no one buys them, they will stop bringing them onto the island. It's too expensive to have a stock here. So I would wonder if the educational campaign, and again, knowing that we can't influence by the bylaw, but things like the farmers who are not using the pesticides, could they get a gold star from the municipality for, really moving toward a toxic-free environment and the safe things. So let's try to reward the folks that are doing right. And, those signs up when you drive off on Denman, like you talked about, are huge. People look for that kind of thing. So, even at the farmer's market, if you're organic, are you not using pesticides, maybe you can advertise that. So I would think about that as a way to, I know we can't legislate it, but we could certainly influence it.
I really like those ideas. Yeah, that's great. I know Susan had put in the chat something along the same lines that she said, I can see Biff's or Ba creating Bowen grown pesticide free stickers for the farmers market and other markets as part of an education campaign. Yeah, along the same lines. But I would love to, love to explore that reward system. Mm-hmm. And as far as the access to chemicals on Bowen, Carla, you had a conversation today with the Bowen Building Center? Yeah,
I did. I spoke with the Bowen Building Center today just to kind of start talking to them about not carrying pesticides and ask if they wanted to come tonight. And they told me that you actually require a special license to sell pesticides, so they don't carry any. And because they don't have the license, which I didn't realize before, which makes me think that probably no one on Bowen does have them. So I think that's an easy, good start right there. So go ahead, Swella.
Well, another easy, good start might be to perhaps, maybe you've got more info, but I would prefer to assume that the golf course folks are doing the best they can. I remember back when they started out, they had a designation that they were trying to be pesticide free at that point. So rather than sort of focusing on one group who may be doing their best and may be doing everything right, let's try and not. I'll just speak to the Islands Trust Conservancy for a moment. I was in a meeting yesterday. I'm the vice chair of the Islands Trust Conservancy, and we've got 111 properties under some kind of protection, whether it's a nature reserve or conservation covenants and things. And one of the things we're working on now is species at risk. And so we're working on some invasive species. So here's another couple that the Islands Trust Conservancy is working on. And I saw photos of them trying to get rid of parrot's feather, which is an aquarium plant that somebody had dumped out and was in a pond. And bullfrogs. I don't know, do you have bullfrogs on the list, Bonnie? If you don't, maybe we can talk sometime. The point is, we have these allies in the Islands Trust, and I'm sure they would welcome a phone call. And they've got some innovative methods that they're using to try to control invasives. And I think of our islands as a little bit of sort of secure zones for native species, if you want to think about it that way, because we've got a saltwater moat around us. And if through education and bylaws like this, we can help native species, we may have them, for example, some of the freshwater, I really support that idea, Michaeli, of ponds and wetlands also being protected if we can. We may be able to have species when the lower mainland has lost a lot of theirs, for example, and have them available to reintroduce 50 years from now, who knows? But I just wanted to mention those things, and there's some unexpected kind of new pests coming as they're released and as climate changes and they suddenly explode in a wetland. Thank you.
Those are great points, so Ellen, thanks. We'll be in touch with the Islands Trust Conservancy, I'm sure, more than once. So I don't know if there's any more questions, but we have been here for about an hour. We scheduled an hour and a half, but if we don't need it, I don't think we need to stay any longer. Does anyone have any more comments or?
Thank you. That's my comment.
So
I have one. It's not really appropriate for this, but if anybody knows of a way to handle those Eurasian fruit flies that get into the raspberries and the red currants, please get in touch after this webinar. I'm looking for an organic way, and there probably are some, but it's a fairly new pest to the lower mainland. So I'm curious if anybody has ideas. Off topic, but since this group is here, thank you.
That's great. And so I will be, I would say probably sometime in February. I would think probably the second council meeting in February. I'd be going back to council for second reading. So just keep your eyes on council agendas if you're so inclined. Yeah, and you know, I think council was very supportive and receptive to the first reading. So please, in the meantime, if you have any other comments, I'll take what you've said tonight and incorporate where relevant and possible. And then please let me know, bbrokenshire@bimbc.ca, or you can call me. And yeah, we just want to make the bylaw as good as possible. And, you know, hopefully down the road, will maybe there'll be changes at the provincial level, and we won't we'll have more rights to regulate. Yeah,
Thank you for managing to do what you've done. With
yeah,
all of
thanks. Yeah, it's tight. You know, we really, you know, it was kind of, you know, just working through it with the committee. You know, we really, yeah, we really found soon after we started that we are bound quite tightly in this respect. So we'll do what we can for now, with the hopes that yeah, our sphere will expand in the future. Yeah.
Sue
I'd
Ellen
just
here,
like
I'm
to
just,
say- I'd just like to say thank you to Bonnie and Carla for all the work you've been doing, and it's been great working with you.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.
Same. Yeah. And thanks Phil and Bruce and everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah, and the subcommittee for all their help as well. Okay, good night, everyone.
Everybody, thank you.
Night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Tia.